The telephone rang at 3:17 a.m. Margaret Sullivan had been sleeping with her bedroom door open for 38 years, waiting for this sound. She didn't fumble or hesitate. Her hand found the receiver before the second ring, muscle memory from decades of midnight hope. The line crackled with the weight of words she had waited half a lifetime to hear. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Detective Broussard. We found him." The old woman's fingers tightened around the plastic receiver. Outside her window, the Louisiana night pressed hot and heavy against the glass. A ceiling fan cut lazy circles above her bed, the same fan that had been spinning since the summer her daughter disappeared. "How certain are you?" Her voice was steady, worn smooth like river stones. 100%, ma'am. DNA doesn't lie." And he confessed. Margaret closed her eyes. The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. When she opened them again, her gaze fell on the framed photograph of Caroline, forever 22, forever smiling from the porch swing of a house Margaret had sold decades ago. "Who?" "Robert Hebert, ma'am." The name hung in the air between them. Margaret felt the room tilt slightly. The kind man who had planted azaleas at Caroline's memorial, the gentle widower who brought her casseroles every Christmas Eve, the beloved neighbor who had helped search the bayou for 3 weeks straight in the summer of 1979. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, the detective said. Margaret replaced the receiver and sat motionless on the edge of her bed. The justice she had prayed for had finally arrived, carried on the shoulders of a monster she had invited into her home for Sunday dinners. What began in the steamy Louisiana summer of 1979 was finally reaching its conclusion in a world Caroline would no longer recognize. Sunset Parish, Louisiana, 1979. A place where time moved like molasses, where humid air trapped secrets and preserved them. A constellation of small towns nestled against the edges of Lake Pontchartrain, connected by 2-lane highways and shared histories. The kind of community where children rode bikes until streetlights flickered on, where screen doors slammed in a familiar rhythm all summer long. Local radio announced birthdays alongside weather forecasts. First names were sufficient identification at the bank. Caroline Sullivan had grown up in this gentle rhythm, her life moving in predictable patterns until she graduated with honors from Sunset Parish High School in 1975. She had been accepted to Tulane University in New Orleans, the first in her family to attend college. Her father, a foreman at the lumber mill, had set aside money since her birth. Her mother had sewn curtains for her dormitory room. Caroline had been studious but not withdrawn, pretty but not vain, ambitious but never arrogant. She volunteered at the parish library on weekends, teaching children to read. She sang in the Methodist church choir. She kept a journal with pressed flowers between its pages. Her graduation photograph showed a young woman with auburn hair and serious eyes. The corners of her mouth turned up in a smile that suggested she knew something others did not. Caroline was 22 that summer, home from her senior year of college preparing applications for law school. She kept her acceptance letters in a wooden box beneath her bed, alongside the amethyst earrings her grandmother had left her. Her final day began like any other. Margaret had made biscuits for breakfast. Caroline's father, James, had already left for his shift at the mill. The radio announcer warned of afternoon thunderstorms. Caroline mentioned she was meeting her childhood friend, Elaine, for lunch at Beaumont's Diner. She planned to spend the afternoon at the library, researching for her thesis on Louisiana property law. She kissed her mother's cheek, leaving the faint scent of Pond's cold cream in her wake. Margaret watched from the porch as Caroline walked down Cypress Lane, canvas bag swinging against her hip, disappearing around the bend where magnolia trees crowded the sidewalk. That was July 17, 1979. It was the last time Margaret Sullivan saw her daughter alive. Caroline met Elaine as planned. They shared a plate of fries and talked about Caroline's upcoming interviews. Elaine later recalled that Caroline seemed distracted, checking her wristwatch frequently. They parted at 1:30 p.m. Caroline headed toward the parish library, a red brick building with white columns that had once been a courthouse. The librarian, Mrs. Fontenot, remembered Caroline arriving around 1:45 p.m. She sat at her usual table near the Louisiana history section, spreading her notes and textbooks across the wooden surface. At approximately 4:15 p.m., Caroline packed her belongings and told Mrs. Fontenot she was heading home before the storm hit. Dark clouds had been gathering all afternoon, pressing down on the small town like a lid on a pot. Caroline never arrived home. By 6:30 p.m., Margaret had called the sheriff's office. By 8 p.m., neighbors were gathering in the Sullivans' living room. By midnight, 50 volunteers were combing the woods along Cypress Lane with flashlights, their voices echoing her name into the darkness. The rain came down in sheets, washing away footprints, drowning out calls. Robert Hebert was among the first to arrive at the Sullivan home that night. A widower in his early 40s, he lived 3 doors down in a neat white house with green shutters. He was the town's unofficial gardener, tending to public spaces, the church grounds, and neighbors' yards with equal devotion. His own garden was a local landmark, a riot of native Louisiana flowers and shrubs arranged with artistic precision. Hebert brought thermoses of coffee for the search party. He put his arm around James Sullivan's shoulders. He promised Margaret they would find her girl. When dawn broke on July 18th, Caroline's canvas bag was discovered in a drainage ditch 2 miles from the library. Her wallet remained inside, untouched. Her house key was still on its rabbit's foot keychain. Only her journal was missing. The sheriff's department expanded the search. State police joined. Volunteers from neighboring parishes arrived in pickup trucks. Days stretched into weeks. Caroline's face stared out from telephone poles and storefront windows. Her story made the New Orleans newspapers, then faded from the headlines as summer ripened into fall. The community maintained its vigil. Church groups organized prayer circles. The high school held candlelight ceremonies. Margaret kept her porch light burning every night. 3 weeks after Caroline disappeared, a fisherman found a woman's shoe floating in Lake Pontchartrain, 12 miles from Sunset Parish. The white canvas sneaker was identified as Caroline's by the small daisy she had drawn on the rubber toe. Divers searched the surrounding waters, but found nothing more. Sheriff Landry maintained that Caroline might have run away, a theory her parents vehemently rejected. Detective Thibodeau suspected Caroline had encountered trouble on the road between the library and home, possibly accepting a ride from a stranger to escape the coming storm. The FBI agent assigned to the case believed Caroline's disappearance might be connected to 2 similar cases in Mississippi. The investigation stumbled forward, hampered by jurisdictional disputes and lack of physical evidence. Witnesses came forward with contradictory sightings: a gas station attendant in Baton Rouge, a waitress in Shreveport, a bus driver in Mobile. Each lead dissolved upon examination. As months passed, the Sullivan home became a museum to absence. Caroline's bedroom remained untouched, textbooks stacked on her desk, some addresses hanging in the closet. Margaret dusted the surfaces weekly. James stopped speaking about Caroline in the present tense. Their marriage bent under the weight of unanswered questions. Robert Hebert continued his quiet support. He brought vegetables from his garden. He mowed their lawn unasked. He established a scholarship in Caroline's name at the high school. When James Sullivan died of a heart attack in 1983, Hebert served as pallbearer and stayed late after the funeral, washing dishes and receiving guests. He became a fixture in Margaret's diminished life, checking her pipes before winter, driving her to doctor's appointments, including her in holiday gatherings. "The kindest man I've ever known," Margaret would tell new neighbors, "a blessing in this tragedy." The years accumulated like sediment. Margaret retired from teaching in 1991. The lumber mill closed in 1994. Sheriff Landry died in 1999, the case file still open on his desk. Detective Thibodeau transferred to New Orleans in 2001. The Methodist church where Caroline had sung was renovated, then damaged by Hurricane Katrina, then renovated again. Technology evolved. Investigative techniques advanced. Caroline's case was periodically reviewed by new detectives with fresh eyes, but no substantial progress was made. Her dental records and fingerprints remained in databases that grew more sophisticated with each passing year. The photograph on Margaret's mantel yellowed slightly. The garden Robert planted at the site of Caroline's memorial matured, azaleas spreading their roots deep into Louisiana soil. Margaret Sullivan turned 70, then 75, then 80. Her hair whitened. Her hands grew knotted with arthritis. She joined a support group for parents of missing children, attending monthly meetings at the community center. She learned the language of loss, the vocabulary of DNA analysis, decomposition rates, cold case procedures. She marked each passing anniversary with a letter to her daughter in the local newspaper. "Wherever you are, Caroline," she wrote on the 35th anniversary, "know that I am still looking. Know that I will never stop. The case of Caroline Sullivan became part of local folklore. A cautionary tale, a ghost story, a tragedy that shaped the identity of Sunset Parish. Children grew up hearing abbreviated versions from parents who had been children themselves when she vanished. Occasional features on unsolved cases brought camera crews to town, but interest always waned. The world moved on. Caroline remained 22. In 2010, the Sunset Parish Sheriff's Department established a cold case unit. Young deputies with specialized training reviewed old evidence with modern techniques. Caroline's case was among the first selected for re-examination. Her canvas bag, preserved in an evidence locker for decades, was tested for DNA. The results were inconclusive. Then, in early 2017, advances in genetic genealogy opened new investigative avenues. DNA samples previously considered insufficient could now yield results through familial matching and extensive database searching. The Cold Case Unit, now led by Detective André Broussard, submitted the canvas bag for advanced testing. Results returned in March 2017 revealed trace amounts of male DNA on the bag's strap. The profile was uploaded to national databases. No immediate match was found, but the investigation continued along parallel tracks, traditional detective work alongside genetic analysis. In April 2017, Detective Broussard decided to approach the case from a different angle. Rather than focusing solely on Caroline's movements that day, he began reconstructing the activities and whereabouts of every male resident of Sunset Parish in July 1979 who still lived in the area. One name on that list was Robert Hebert. The interview began as a formality. Hebert, now 81, his once robust frame diminished by age, his gardener's hands spotted with liver spots, welcomed Broussard into his home. The detective noted the immaculate interior, the walls lined with photographs of town events and church gatherings, pictures of Caroline's memorial garden, a framed newspaper clipping about the scholarship fund. Broussard asked standard questions about Hebert's recollections of July 17, 1979. The elderly man responded with the practiced ease of someone who had told the same story many times. He had been at home, preparing his garden for the coming storm. He had seen Caroline walk past that morning. He had not seen her return. He had joined the search as soon as he heard she was missing. Then Broussard asked a question no one had posed in 38 years. "Mr. Hebert, would you be willing to provide a DNA sample? We're collecting samples from everyone who lived in the area at the time to rule them out." Hebert's demeanor changed subtly. His fingers, which had been tapping a gentle rhythm on his knee, went still. "Of course," he said after a moment. "Anything to help Margaret finally get answers." The swab was taken. Broussard thanked him and left. The sample was sent to the State Crime Lab, marked routine. On May 15, 2017, the results came back. Robert Hebert's DNA matched the sample found on Caroline's bag. Broussard immediately requested a search warrant for Hebert's property. Beneath the azalea bushes in his backyard, ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. Excavation revealed a small metal box containing a leather-bound journal with pressed flowers between its pages, Caroline's missing journal. Confronted with this evidence, Robert Hebert, the beloved gardener of Sunset Parish, the pillar of the community, the trusted friend, confessed to the murder of Caroline Sullivan. His statement, recorded in the same interview room where grieving parents had waited for news decades earlier, was delivered in a calm, measured voice. Caroline had stopped by his house that afternoon, seeking shelter from the approaching storm. She had often visited his garden, admiring his work, sometimes helping with planting. On that day, something changed. He described her in his kitchen, rain soaking her blouse, her hair curling damply against her neck. She had mentioned her plans to leave for law school in the fall. Something inside him had snapped. He couldn't bear the thought of her leaving. He had loved her, not as a neighbor, not as a daughter figure, but as a man loves a woman. "I just wanted to talk to her," he said on the recording, "to make her understand how special she was to me." But she laughed. Not meanly, just surprised. She said I was like an uncle to her. An uncle. What happened next emerged in clinical detail. The heavy ceramic mug he grabbed from the counter, the sound it made against her temple, the way she fell without crying out, the burial in his garden beneath the azaleas he planted the following spring, the decades of tending that grave, of watching Margaret Sullivan age in the shadow of uncertainty, while he brought her vegetables grown in soil that concealed her daughter. "I kept her close," he said. "I made sure her mother was taken care of. I never meant to hurt Caroline. I loved her." The recording ended with his request for water, his voice as mundane as if he had been describing a recipe instead of a murder. The news broke over Sunset Parish like the summer storm that had been gathering on the day Caroline disappeared. Neighbors stood in shocked clusters on front lawns, church phone trees activated with unprecedented speed. The local radio station interrupted its programming. Out-of-town news vans appeared on Cypress Lane. Margaret Sullivan received the confirmation she had waited 38 years to hear in the sheriff's office, surrounded by deputies who had not been born when her daughter went missing. She listened to Detective Broussard without expression, her veined hands folded neatly in her lap. When he finished speaking, she asked only one question. "May I see the journal?" The leather-bound book was brought to her in an evidence bag. Through the plastic, she recognized Caroline's handwriting. The pressed flowers, now brown and fragile, were still arranged in patterns between the pages. The final entry was dated July 17, 1979. "Storm coming this afternoon. Heading to the library, then stopping by Mr. Hebbert's to see the new hydrangeas he's planting. He said they'll be blue as the sky by next summer." Margaret closed her eyes. The man who had held her hand at her husband's funeral had been the same man who made her husband die, not knowing what happened to their only child. The man who had brought her soup when she had pneumonia in 1992 had been the same man who had stolen her daughter's future with a single violent act. The hands that had tended Caroline's memorial garden had first dug her unmarked grave. The excavation of Robert Hebbert's garden took place on May 20, 2017. State forensic anthropologists directed the careful removal of layers of soil, azalea roots, and thyme. News helicopters circled overhead. Neighbors stood vigil behind police barricades. Some brought flowers, others brought rage. Caroline's remains were found 6 feet beneath the centermost azalea bush, the one with vibrant pink blooms that Heber had often called Caroline's crown. Her skeleton was largely intact, positioned as if sleeping. Fragments of the clothing she had worn that day remained: metal buttons from her jeans, the zipper of her cardigan, the matching earring to the one found in her canvas bag. A fracture on her right temporal bone confirmed the cause of death. The town gathered for a proper burial on June 3, 2017. Caroline Sullivan was laid to rest in the cemetery plot her parents had purchased decades earlier, beside her father. The Methodist church overflowed with mourners. Former classmates now in their 60s, retired teachers, current students who knew her only as a local legend. The choir sang the hymns Caroline had once performed. Margaret sat in the front pew, her spine straight, her face composed. Robert Hebbert pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. At 81, with heart disease and early-stage dementia, he received a 30-year sentence that everyone understood he would not live to complete. The court proceedings were brief, clinical, anticlimactic after so many years of mystery. Margaret visited him once in the parish detention center before his transfer to state prison. No one knows what words passed between them. She emerged after 17 minutes, her expression unchanged, and asked Detective Broussard to drive her home. The house on Cypress Lane became quiet again. The telephone no longer held the promise of revelation. Margaret removed the photographs of Robert Hebbert from family albums. She requested that the azaleas at Caroline's memorial be replaced with Louisiana irises. She continued attending her support group, now as someone who could offer others the cold comfort that answers might eventually come. In the summer of 2017, Margaret began volunteering at the cold case unit, reviewing old files, writing letters to other waiting families. "Time doesn't heal," she told a reporter who interviewed her for a feature on solved cold cases. "But truth creates a different kind of wound, one that can finally start to scar over." She died in her sleep on February 12, 2018, 9 months after her daughter was found. Her obituary mentioned that she had lived to see justice served. Robert Hebert, already failing in prison, was not informed of her passing. The house on Cypress Lane was sold to a young family from New Orleans. The Sullivan Family Scholarship continues to send one Sunset Parish student to law school each year. The Caroline Sullivan Cold Case Foundation now provides resources to small-town police departments seeking to solve long-dormant investigations. In the parish cemetery, mother and daughter lie beside each other at last, their headstones identical in shape and stone. Visitors sometimes leave flowers, never azaleas. The gardener who tended the town's grief while burying its secrets now tends nothing. His own grave will eventually be unmarked, his name fading from community memory, even as Caroline's endures. 38 years passed before justice arrived, too late for a mother's comfort, but not too late for truth. What began in the summer of 1979 with a young woman's walk home has finally reached its conclusion. In a world where telephone booths have disappeared, where libraries contain computers instead of card catalogues, where DNA can speak for those whose voices were silenced decades ago, some stories stay buried for decades, preserved like pressed flowers between the pages of time. Some secrets take root and grow until they break through the surface, demanding to be seen. The gardener of Sunset Parish tended his terrible truth for 38 years, watching it bloom each spring, pruning away questions, fertilizing alibis. But beneath every carefully maintained garden lies soil that remembers what was buried there, and sooner or later, the earth gives up its dead. The truth about Caroline Sullivan emerged from the ground where she had been hidden, from the DNA that waited patiently for science to advance, from the journal that held her final thoughts. It emerged from a killer's aging conscience and a mother's unflagging perseverance. Sunset Parish still stands beside Lake Pontchartrain. Children still ride bikes until streetlights flicker on. But now they pass by a small park dedicated to Caroline Sullivan, where irises bloom in place of azaleas, where a plaque reminds visitors that justice may be delayed, but is never truly denied. Where were you when her truth finally surfaced? How many other stories lie waiting beneath familiar ground, beneath everyday lives, beneath the careful gardening of secrets? Stories like Caroline's still wait to be told. Remember them, so that none will be forgotten.